Well, you say you're a Roman Catholic, and
I also study physics.
Yes, but I mean, do you think the wafer turns into the body of Jesus?
No.
Good, I'm delighted to hear.
Then you're not really wrong.
Here's the response from Martina when pulled with the query of the earliest memory of being taught a religious concept that didn't make sense. She says, transubstantiation, eating the wafer and turning into the body of Christ. They tried to explain it to me, but I was like, what do you mean I'm eating him?
We say the Eucharist is not simply a sign or a symbol. It is Jesus really, truly, and substantially present under the Eucharistic signs of bread and wine. Well, how can we begin to explain this doctrine, which can strike a lot of people as odd?
The Catholic Eucharist, where the child is given a wafer and told that this is the body of Jesus, is a religious tradition that originated in the making of what are called Osiris cakes, or bread cakes that were made during the annual planting of wheat on the Nile River. To explain, we will read a few segments from Martin Larsson's 1960 article, The Great Osiris. Firstly, he points out how mummies would have inscriptions attached to them which read, I am the great Osiris, let not my limbs suffer corruption, and so on. This was all centered on the annual Osirian mystery cult annual festival called the Coac Festival, which is the precursor to what we now know as the annual December Christmas season. It was a public festival centered on the planting of wheat following the receding of the annual Nile flood. After the flood receded, it would leave on the banks of the Nile a fertile black soil called Kim. The death of Osiris was signified by the fact that this was the very day on which the wheat was planted. Accordingly, in the Egyptian view of things, the god and the seed died at the same moment, for the grain was the god, and the god was the grain. Here we see the origin of the confusion when modern Catholic children are told that when they eat the wafer, it becomes the body of Jesus, which is a cultural transmission of the original fact that when people were given Osiris cakes in Egypt, they were thought or told they were eating the body of Osiris. In short, the sacrifice which was eaten and which was the Eucharist was the dying God reborn in the grain. At Dendera Temple, one can find inscriptions of how these Osiris cakes of divine bread were made from the body of Osiris. These were the mysterious sacred cakes, which Plutarch calls the inward parts of the god, and which were in fact the Eucharist bread. The start of this Osiris Coac festival was in the town of Abydos in Upper Egypt. Over the course of the month, priests would carry on a float a statue of Osiris, handing out these Osiris cakes, going from town to town, eventually ending in Busiris, which is the assumed burial place of Osiris. In 2000 BC, the Egyptian dynasty was the world's largest cultural empire by power size. Over the years, the Egyptian dynasty held sway until about 1100 BC, when it began to lose power. By the time of 500 BC, the Osiris cult was adopted by the Greeks into that of Dionysus, and also adopted by the Persian Empire in the form of Zoroaster. In 250 BC, the Roman Republic began to grow in size, and by Zero AD, the Roman Empire was at its cultural zenith, dominating the world, and accordingly, the Dionysus version of Osiris was transformed into the Roman version of Bacchus, and therefrom into the Christian story of Jesus of Nazareth. In sum, over the course of about 5,000 years, what were originally Osiris wheat cakes, representative of Egyptian Eucharist, became Jesus bread wafers, representative of Christian Eucharist.